Hey, this is Bill. I'm the salty old Marine. I'd like to talk to you today about living with PTSD. Let's talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, or as it is known, PTSD. I wanted to talk about it because it is something that affects me. I am service-connected for PTSD, and I receive treatment for PTSD from the Veterans Administration. And I know that an awful lot of my fellow veterans also suffer from PTSD. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I know and what I've learned about PTSD as I have made the journey from diagnosis to treatment to applying for disability. What does it mean? How does it affect my life? So let's dig in. First of all, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic, it means after something traumatic has happened. Many people mistake that for meaning combat. In older times, they used to call that being shell-shocked. If you ever saw the movie Patton, where he got in trouble for slapping a soldier who was in the infirmary for shell shock, he called it cowardice. That was PTSD. And that is, in fact, PTSD, right? That's post-traumatic stress disorder, as we now know it. But it doesn't have to be related to combat. A traumatic incident is a traumatic incident, and people are affected differently by traumatic incidents. All of us experience trauma in our lives. It happens. A parent passes away. A loved pet dies. We get in a car accident. You get in a fight. Some people get arrested. Things happen to us in our lives, and not everything is sunshine and roses. Sometimes we experience trauma. But it becomes a disorder, PTSD, when it begins to affect our lives on a day-to-day basis in a negative way, in a way that we can't easily overcome. So, having explained that, let me talk about myself for a moment. I served from 1979 to 1985 in the Marine Corps from age 18. And without getting into too many specifics, I will say this. I experienced some traumatic events when I was 18 years old, right out of boot camp, at my first duty station where I was going to my military occupational specialty school in Camp Lejeune. And as a military policeman, which is what I did in the Marine Corps, I was a first responder. I served in situations where I had to go to traffic accidents, fatalities. I had to break up fights, bars, domestic disturbances. I dealt a lot with DUIs, people who wanted to fight when you pulled them over because they knew it was going to negatively affect their careers. All sorts of things. I was first responder at a helicopter crash where the pilot was killed. I saw a plane on fire and the pilot didn't get out. It was on the ground on a runway. And a lot of things like that, right? Training accidents, jeeps overturned, tank trapped underwater, that kind of thing. So as a younger Marine, and even later on after I got out of the military, I wouldn't have classed my experiences as PTSD. In fact, I don't think I had much of an opinion of people who had PTSD because it seemed to me at the time that they should just get over it. It seemed like I knew I had experienced some traumatic events, and they didn't particularly bother me afterwards So it wasn't PTSD. And I couldn't quite grasp the idea that other people had more of a problem getting past the traumatic events that happened to them. Okay, so that turned out to be a mistake. The years passed, decades in fact, and it wasn't until my 40s that I began to have nightmares. And they became worse, and my sleep was disrupted. And I tossed and I turned and I shouted in my sleep and I cried and I whimpered and I woke up in a cold sweat. Couldn't get back to sleep, and I had intrusive thoughts during the day. And I began to act out in various ways aggressively. Lost a job, lost a marriage, lost a house, went through bankruptcy. At the time, I didn't realize that that was PTSD speaking through me. I didn't realize that those were symptoms of PTSD. Well, maybe the nightmares, but I didn't make that connection, you know. Anyway, into my 50s, it got bad. And so finally, I reached out. My first thought was to reach out for therapy through my private insurance, find a local therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, somebody I could talk to about these things. And what I discovered was, although counseling was available in the civilian world, none of these therapists that I spoke with had any experience with military PTSD. They didn't understand my experience, my history. I couldn't speak to them in a way that made sense. At least I didn't feel like it could. And as a result, I ended up turning to the VA. And it was great. The VA basically welcomed me into the healthcare system. And I got assigned to a therapist, and I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. And I went through prolonged exposure, and I went through group therapy, and I received medication for my nightmares. And I'm still seeking therapy through VA Community Services, the local vet center, which we're still setting up, but I'll be taking advantage of that as soon as I can. So what is PTSD to me? PTSD manifests itself in a variety of ways for me. I am hypervigilant. I do not leave my house unless I have to. I go to my job. I spend some time volunteering to teach martial arts to children after work, a couple of times a week. And other than that, I just don't like leaving my house. My wife and I may go out to dinner now and again, occasionally with some family friends, but I haven't seen any of my relatives in close to 30 years, aside from my daughter and my granddaughter. I have security cameras set up all over my house. At last count, somewhere between 20 and 30 of them. The house is bristling with cameras, and I monitor all of them. And I get up in the middle of the night. If I have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or whatever, I check the locks on the doors, and I look out the windows, even at 3 a.m. on a quiet night in a quiet suburb, in a virtually crime-free neighborhood. It is what it is. And I like to spend my time growing flowers and doing yard work and not leaving my house. I recently blew my stack at one of my neighbors who took it upon himself to come over to my yard and start trimming around my hedges and so forth with his weed trimmer. I'm sure he thought he was doing me a favor. Big mistake. I blew it. I just exploded. Get off my yard. You can't come on my property. That's just that's a non-starter. You can't do it. And I don't know how to explain that in a way that doesn't make me feel like a crazy person. Maybe I am a crazy person. Anyway, I have over-the-top anger responses like the one I just mentioned. I have panic attacks at work. It doesn't take much. Somebody says something, somebody does something, and I want to explode. And in the past, I have. I'm learning to recognize that now. So when my pulse starts racing and I start getting angry and I realize I'm getting angry at something, it's just not that big a deal. I'm slowly learning to deal with that. But it's still a panic attack. It still affects me. It still leaves me shaking with rage for no good reason. And I'm working on that. So those are some of the symptoms that I have to deal with. I'm not going to talk about all the symptoms because I sometimes worry that some of those might get a net dropped on me. Those of you who know PTSD know exactly what I'm talking about. I'll talk about them to a therapist, but not on YouTube, not in person to people. So drop a comment if you suffer from PTSD. Tell me what it's like for you. I'm interested. Don't put too much personal information in. I'm not trying to dig your private life out and expose it. Just tell me what you think. I hope you found this helpful. This is Bill. I am the Salty Old Marine. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend. And as always, have a great day.